Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephanie Allais, and I am based at the Center for Researching Education and Labor, which is a research center that looks at vocational education and skill formation at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. And on behalf of this observatory, I would like to really welcome everyone here. It's our first seminar in this series. And we in South Africa are excited to join with colleagues in other BRICS countries. We're very happy that colleagues at HSE have initiated this group. And we think that it's really useful to bring together countries from our different contexts to really share analysis on skill formation and on our different systems. So just to very briefly explain the observatory, the idea that we have put together is to try and develop a stronger comparative lens on factors that are really shaping the ways in which skill formation is happening in different countries, using the BRICS countries as an entry into that, because I think those of us who work in and have used skill formation literature know that it's very, it has been very dominated by a certain group of wealthy industrialized countries and very underused, underutilized, underexplored in many other countries in the rest of the world, where we know that it is really important and that skill formation is a really key concern. So yeah, it's as you see on the slide, an issue that really gets lost in many of our countries, and many comparative studies don't get enough profile from our countries. And so we are really trying to bring together researchers to both showcase the work that we're doing on our individual countries, but also to see if we can develop stronger analytic tools, concepts, frameworks for really thinking through the relationships between skill formation systems, economic development, transitioning economies, and so on. So that's really the kind of the broader purpose of this. It's a platform for us to collaborate across our countries, build a culture of comparative educational research, rooted obviously in our own context, and that's why the seminar series has been conceptualized in a way that researchers from each country will be presenting an overview of the systems in their country, to build a stronger community of people working in this kind of comparative field, to raise awareness and visibility of emerging countries, and obviously, as I already said, to create a platform for sharing knowledges, building stronger conceptual frameworks, etc. It is unique, I think, this initiative, because of its emphasis on the BRICS nations, and because we're really trying to look at skill formation in its broader social, economic, institutional, cultural context, because all of those things shape the ways in which education and training emerges, is valued, is funded, is enrolled for, how people succeed, what skills workplaces want, and so on. And so that's why we're really trying to, yeah, that's what we're really trying to showcase here. There will be, the network is, the group is planning different kinds of ways of engaging, develop sharing research findings in different ways, and this seminar is one of the is the first of a key set of seminars in which we will be getting experts from different countries to really share their perspectives and insights on their country. So the aim is to produce some outputs that will be available for people if they want to be able to look up and find information, and you can see them listed there. Obviously, also, you know, academics are always publishing in academic journals, but we wanted to, the idea is to produce some more kind of synthesized, more easily digestible pieces of information about the different countries to really make it easier to compare, but also easier to do research on these contexts. So that's just some information about how the observatory has been structured, which will be shared with colleagues. That's a small group of us who came together and kind of brainstormed the idea, led by our colleagues who really have been come at this with a lot of energy and initiative from HSE. And that's Vera and Maxim, and what we are planning for the rest of this year, what we're planning for the rest of this year, the seminar series, the first one today on Russia, and then an upcoming set of seminars on the different countries. There is going to be a panel at the World Educational Research Association conference in Brazil in October, and hopefully a publication in December, really focusing on the BRICS countries and TVET in particular in the BRICS countries. So as I said, we're starting today, and we're really pleased to have Vera, and I hope I won't pronounce your surname wrong, Vera, but you'll correct me if I do. But I'll just say in my defense that everyone always pronounces my surname wrong. So, Vera Maltseva, who is the director for the Center of Skills Development and Vocational Education at HSE University, and one of the co-founders and initiators of this observatory. And I think, you know, she's a really excellent person to be able to give us a really high-level analytical take on the Russian system. So over to you, Vera. We are going to have the presentation, and then people can obviously make comments in the chat as they're going. Vera, I don't know if you want to, how you feel about taking questions and comments as you go, but otherwise we will obviously, after her presentation, have time for questions, comments, and hopefully a lot of engagement and discussion on the Russian TVET context reforms and labor market linkages. We all know those are the really burning issues for all of our TVET systems, and we are all really looking forward to hearing from you today. Thank you. Over to you, Vera.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for your inspiring and so warm introduction. Dear colleagues, hello everyone. It's such a great pleasure to open this series of CERE Observatory seminars dedicated to TVET. TVET is our special topic in 2025. And I believe that many emerging economies, and especially BRICS 5, are experiencing a kind of pivotal moment for vocational education. And Russia is very much part of this wave. So there couldn't be a better time to join forces on this topic. And I sincerely hope that the CERE platform will first connect us and support meaningful collaboration in the field of comparative research, and as well as in TVET. So today I invite you to discuss Russian TVET. And here is our roadmap for today's session. So we'll kick it off with some kind of broader context that shape TVET development, I mean labor market dynamics and demographic shifts. Then we will dive into the Russian TVET system, I mean its structure, governance, and some institutional evolution. Next, we'll focus on pathways and outcomes of credits, so how students, graduates move through TVET and what labor market awaits them. And finally, I'll spotlight the present challenges and policy dilemmas from my point of view that define our reform agenda. So my idea today is to show a picture of Russian TVET from both a macro and micro perspective, right? Some major institutional shifts and the pathways of students, of graduates. So yeah, let's start with taking you in this broad landscape. And for sure, the first context is labor market and qualification landscape. So, first of all, it's quite a well-known fact that Russia stands among the top countries in terms of educational attainment, with a substantial reserve of human capital. So, over the past 2 decades, as you can see on the slide, we've seen a steady increase in the overall level of education, primarily driven by the expansion of higher education. But in practice, most employed population in the workforce hold vocational qualifications, occupying positions classified as either lower skilled or mid-skilled. Importantly, this positive trajectory in educational attainment has been reinforced by ongoing changes in labor market demand. So if we look at the graph on the right, it's clear that the mid-skilled and high-skilled jobs have become more prevalent, while the share of the low-skilled and non-qualified roles has diminished. By the way, the skill level breakdown you can see on the right is based on the ISCO groups and the ILO methodology that help us attribute each of the 10 groups to the skill levels. This gives us a structured view of how qualifications match up with employment opportunities in Russia. On the next slide, I just put this data that we've already seen on the supply of qualifications and this demand for qualification skill levels in Russia. And this helps us to picture a kind of interesting picture like you see right now. So it's a quite straightforward comparison for the sake of illustration of overall match. So here we don't account for any regional sectoral heterogeneity. But the idea is this: in high skill segment, this is purple on the slide, right? There is a fairly good alignment. 31% of jobs are high skilled in Russia, while 35% employed people hold a higher education diploma. So there is a small but still sensitive degree of over-education, over-qualification in this category. However, things are less straightforward when we look at the vocational qualifications in the red bars. About 60% of jobs require vocational qualifications on the Russian labor market, and most of these demand lower skilled workers. In reality, only 46% employed individuals have vocational qualifications, not 60. And if you dig deeper, you'll see that within this group, see it on the right, the bars in red and pink, there is a further imbalance. Significantly fewer employed people actually hold the relevant type of vocational qualification that matches what the market demands. So the majority of those with vocational qualification might experience over-education since they hold mid-skilled qualification while labor market demand lower skilled. It's important to note here that the non-qualified gray segment right on the top, among the employed can be quite misleading since many workers in Russia might have completed short-term training programs for blue-collar occupations, but they aren't counted here as a full-fledged secondary vocational education, official statistics, so this is gray here. But the basic idea is this: there is a robust gap. The labor market needs more lower skilled vocational qualifications, while the majority of those in employment actually hold mid-level credentials. So this kind of mismatch between what employees need and what workers possess and what they truly aspire is one of the challenges of, I guess, any TVET policy she could see right now. On the next slide, we can get familiarized with another big context about the educational landscape and shifts in educational aspirations in Russia. In the 2000s, Russia experienced the massification of higher education, with youth flocking to universities. By the late 2010s, the surge bleeded. Average years of schooling increased rapidly and then stabilized, in higher education enrollments right now among the target group between 17 to 25 sit around 30%, as you can see on the slide at the purple line. At the same time, participation in vocational education, the red line, has been steadily increasing, and by 2024, coverage reached 46% among those aged 15 to 19. This is the target cohort for vocational education in Russia. So this trend aligns with changes in educational aspirations. The blue dashed line, although a strong preference for higher education persists, pro-university ambitious have gradually declined, dropping to about 60%, while still remaining remarkably high. But these figures signal a gradual rebalancing between academic and vocational pathways for young people in Russia. Both students and parents recognize TVET as a path not only to jobs, but also to future progression. So TVET is no longer plan B for a fraction of youngsters in Russia. It is a strategic choice in quite uncertain labor market and a first transition in their educational trajectory. So in the second slide, is about demographics. So in addition to the shifts of educational aspirations and evolving labor market demand, this is a critical factor shaping the future of TVET, higher education, demography, and the size of the target age cohorts. So if we examine cohort trends over the last 25 years in Russia, we see that since the mid-2000s, youth cohorts, the groups entering vocational and higher education, shrank dramatically. Looking ahead, projections of the Russian Statistical Bureau Rosstat projections suggest only a brief uptick in the 2030s before a deep and substantial decline, dropping cohort sizes below post-Soviet levels. If we look closer to the yellow line, to the TVET enrollments, admissions to TVET have largely mirrored these demographic curves, as you can see. But what's especially noteworthy is that since the mid-2010s, TVET intake has started to grow at a pace faster than the demographic trend would suggest. And this indicates a genuine surge in demand for vocational education among young people and their families. And for TVET system, this also means adapting both to potential periods of expansion and contraction. So this is quite challenging. Yes, and finally, we're going to switch to the discussion of the structure and the governance of the Russian TVET. So the next slide, we can start with some key facts about the system from international classification perspective. Some background information, colleagues, just background. The vocational track in Russia operates at ICD levels 3 to 5. But unlike many national systems and, for instance, dual models, there is no option for higher level vocational progression within the system itself, meaning there is no higher vocational education in Russia. However, the pathways, vocational and university pathways, are notably permeable. Graduates of that programs can enter higher education, often without having to pass the challenging unified state exam, the high stake exam in Russia that university applicants face. This flexibility can be an advantage for sure for young people, but also it brings the risk of stratification because some routes, the conventional academic route from 11th grade in Russia to higher education is highly prestigious, while others, for instance, progression from vocational to higher education, could be seen as a fallback option. Regarding VET program structures here, what we can see that there are two main types. Lower skilled training programs for skilled workers, levels 3, 4, and mid-skilled programs, typically levels 4 and 5, for instance, accountants, nurses, and for instance, cookers, roofers, and so on. Program length varies depending on whether a student enters after grade 9 or after grade 11. For instance, those enrolling after 9th grade, so this is the mandatory minimum for Russian students, programs are usually longer by 1 year, lasting up to 2 years, 10 months, or even 3 years and 10 months. Students who enter immediately after grade 11, they have completed upper secondary education, they find their programs shorter, much shorter. The quickest path to a lower skill qualification after 11th grade is just 10 months, while a mid-skill track may last up to 2 years and 10 months. What's remarkable here that there are nearly 1,900 programs offered in TVET, but only 15 account for half of all enrollments. Another important trend here is that the lower skill segment of blue-collar professions is shrinking rapidly compared to mid-skilled. So this indicates rising aspirations of youngsters, of their families for high qualifications, even within vocational education. All right, then let's move on and discuss another very peculiar thing about the Russian vocational education system, that is elite tracking. As you can see, after grade 9, students face a major educational crossroads, the most significant decision point in their entire school journey. Approximately half, 48% in 2024, half of students choose the vocational path after 9th grade. While most graduates from the 11th grade, around 70%, head to universities. So those entering VAT after grade 11 typically do so after not passing the Unified State exam. So this highlights that VAT is both a first choice and a second chance. On the next slide, we're gonna dive in a little bit into the network of TVET providers in Russia. This is a kind of a map. First of all, because vocational education is designed to meet the needs of local labor markets, one of its defining characteristics is the territorial accessibility of colleges. And in Russia, the TVET network is highly extensive, with more than 4,500 institutions across the country. Another notable feature here is that 8% of all providers of all institutions are actually part of universities. They're colleges or faculties within higher education institutions, and it's very peculiar. Nevertheless, the majority of providers are regional colleges, so they are overseen by regional ministries of education. There are also some colleges affiliated with sectoral ministries, right? The segment of private colleges is pretty small, so as it accounts for just 13% of the total. In our recent comparative study on the right, on the Russian TVET landscape, we identified 4 main clusters of colleges in Russia. What's important here for us is that the majority of institutions, the VET providers of those 4,500, they are broad access providers. So they are non-selective and quite dependent on state funding, while only 8% of all of the providers fall into the top performing cluster, meaning they are highly selective and they have some external funding. What's peculiar, half of these top performers are colleges within higher education institutions. So the heterogeneity of TVET providers is quite understudied in Russia, and our team is working to fill this gap. And now let's have a look at the students on the next slide that populate these colleges. So first of all, about the number of students, TVET students in Russia, this is 3.6 million. But what's more important, TVET students are quite young. As you can see, half of TVET students are aged 16, reflecting immediate entry after school after 9th grade. So 77% of all students in VAT, they start vocational studies right after finishing school without entering labor market, gap years and everything. So the majority are just ex-9th graders. When we look at fields of study in Russian vocational education, so we can see the 3 major groups that stand out. Nearly half, 45% of all students pursue technical engineering specialties, the red segment on the pie chart, including substantial 10% in IT professions. They are on the rise and they are highly in demand both in the labor market in terms of aspirations of youngsters. The second largest group is composed of commerce, service-oriented programs, for instance, accounting, hospitality. They are quite huge. The third most popular field is healthcare, with nursing programs leading the way. Notably that more than 1/3 of students in Russian TVET pay tuition, and fee-based study is rising, linked to both in-demand specializations, for instance, IT and healthcare, and constraint-free seats in those in-demand programs. So here we can witness a kind of a clash between the demand of the labor market for lower skilled technical roles and aspirations and demand of individuals and families for mid-skilled professions. And also on this slide, we can see a pronounced gender imbalance across these fields. Technical professions are overwhelmingly male, while helping professions, social services, healthcare, education are dominated by women. Finally, another important dimension in the student profile is socioeconomic background. on the right of this slide. As in many other countries, Russian TVET students more often come from families with lower level of educational and cultural capital than their peers in universities, right? So this kind of short overview, and then we can go deeper into the governance and institutional dynamics. Yeah. So briefly, the Russian VAT system is still predominantly state-driven. About 80% of its funding comes from the government, I mean regional budgets, while 13% is contributed by fee payers, by individual fee payers, and only 4% from employers. So a clear indication that meaningful employer engagement remains limited. The system also remains largely school-based. Most teachers come from general secondary backgrounds, and only 6% have direct industry experience. So hands-on workplace know-how is not widespread among educators. Although practical training is kind of a core principle of any vocational education in any country, there is a significant variation in its delivery. For instance, in accounting programs, practical experience makes up about 15% of study time, while in highly practical trades, lower skilled trades like cooking, roofing, it can reach 40-50%. But it's important to note that lower skill programs, which typically involve this intensive practical training, they now account only 17% of total enrollments. So the majority are studying school-based. And this is kind of the most pressing topic and remains a major challenge for the current TVET reform in Russia. And this topic, I will return to it and discuss it in greater detail further on. So and now let's go into much more details about the governance and historical legacies. Yeah, the next slide. First of all, governing Russian TVET is a complex interplay. So the blue shading on the table indicates the depth of participation and influence in this triangle between federal authorities, regional authorities, and industry. As we can see, first, federal authorities, meaning Ministry of Education, first of all, of Russia, federal authorities, they define national standards, basic curricula, and some frameworks. And they regulate quotas for student enrollment. They just accept them. They just, and also federal authorities, ministry leads and launches major modernization projects in TVET sector in Russia. What about regional authorities? First of all, they tailor specialities and quotas, enrollments to labor market needs. They oversee performance of VET providers and collaborate on curricula with industry. And also they launch some local pilots within the federal projects. They implement regional innovations, but the true big modernization projects are at the level of the federal authorities. As for the industry advises on their staffing needs and professional standards, though real influence and investment remain work in progress. I will touch upon recent reforms with the large-scale federal program later on this topic. So this is a kind of triangle, but we see that this triangle has a very specific shape, and blue shading indicates, and you can clearly see that which corners of this triangle truly play the most pivotal roles. These are the regional and federal authorities. Yes, and the next slide. So the governance model of TVET is built on a complex legacy shaped by the century-long history of managing vocational education and training. And let's have a closer look. For sure, it should be brief, but I will try to. First of all, let's go through each big era in the evolution of vocational education in Russia. If we talk about the early period, pre-Soviet period, vocational education was largely informal and employer-driven, so the state's involvement was limited and fragmented. Training was provided by the private enterprises, some emerging manufacturers, local charities. Technical colleges in Russian technicum emerged for mid-level technical professions supporting urban modernization and niche trade upskilling. The landscape changed dramatically under the Soviet state, which centralized and planned vocational education on a massive scale. So that was tightly aligned with the economic imperative of building a mass industrial workforce. And this era saw the rise of technical colleges and the formal creation of vocational schools in Russia, ПТУ or училище, for lower skilled professions, which together formed a strong integrated school industry system. So that became universal, providing routes to skilled jobs and enforcing social mobility. In the post-Soviet era, Russia's TVET system went through several important transformations. And the first major shift was decentralization and shift towards regional governance. As the country's economy and governance became more regionalized, the state's focus on training workers for industry weakened, especially during the early post-Soviet years, which were like particularly challenging time for Russian manufacturing. This led directly to a second transformation, a noticeable decline in employer engagement. Many businesses lost their incentives to participate in training, and instead they concentrated on adapting to new economic realities. The third transformation was a sharp drop in the prestige of vocational education, coupled with growing occupational mobility. This was driven by rapid expansion of higher education in the 2000s and fundamental changes in the labor market. So labor market started favoring high skilled jobs in high qualifications. So these factors contributed to a widening image gap between TVET and university pathways. For sure, this gap had been there for years and for centuries. Centuries, for decades, but that was the time when it became huge. Partly in response, the system underwent some institutional changes. Lower skilled and mid-skilled programs were merged in a single level, secondary vocational education, and many former vocational schools, which carried a negative reputation and image, were recognized and rebranded as colleges. And now at the current era, today Russia has moved to a hybrid model with federal and regional authorities sharing governance with an increasing but still developing role for industry. Unified VET colleges now dominate. Modernization efforts, they just accelerated. We'll discuss that in detail. And employer partnerships are now kind of formalized. But still, the system is continuing to deal with legacies of centralization and some image challenges. Let's get deeper in this current phase. So from 2014 to these days to 2025. Over the past decades, so overall, the Russia's approach to that somehow shifted from a state-centric model to a more dynamic system, emphasizing first public-private partnerships and alignment with labor market needs. If we try to kind of segment this timeline, I'm going to put it in 5 parts of this kind of reforms, and we'll start from the 2014 to 2016. This phase, for me, marked a massive federal effort to modernize the entire TVET sector. First of all, Russian government focused on renewing infrastructure and upgrading training equipment. Second, launching extensive upgrades to federal state educational standards in line with labor market needs, particularly with the introduction of the so-called top 50 list of professions with the most demanded professions in the labor market. And for these professions, these federal educational standards were specifically updated. And the third highlight of this phase of the first one, active engagement in skills competitions in the World Skills movement, which drove practical demonstration-based assessment into the state graduation process for the first time. At the next phase of 2017-19, what happened there? This phase was focused more on quality assurance and practical skills. And here, the highlight here is expansion of skills competitions and its consequences. The big focus on these skills competitions served not only as a powerful tool for raising the prestige of vocational professions, but also as a major driver for improving the quality of training content and teacher qualifications, At this phase, skills competition, they just rapidly expanded, not just at national level, but also across regions, specific industry sector, and greatly increasing the number of teachers and students involved. Targeted professional development programs were launched for teachers, specifically designed to enhance their practical teaching skills and using the methodology developed through skills competitions. And another major consequence of the expansion of skills competition movement here was the introduction of the so-called demonstration exam as a formal assessment of graduates' skills. This in turn prompted significant changes in teaching practices, pushing colleges to focus on real-world, practice-based training and objectively measured outcomes. So these initiatives for sure have also been backed by significant financial investment at this phase between 2017 and 2019. Substantial funding has been allocated to support expansion of skills competitions and monetization of these training facilities. And the next phase, 2022, marked by the pandemic, it definitely tested the resilience and adaptability of the Russian TVET sector. So here we saw rapid transition to remote, blended and digital teaching across the colleges, and also continued adaptation of demonstration exams in remote and hybrid formats. But starting from 2022, Russian TVET entered a transformative new era with the launch of the flagship federal project Professionalitet. This initiative marked a decisive shift towards much closer integration between education and the real needs of the labor market. At the heart of this reform was the creation of sectoral education industry clusters. This is a kind of strategic partnership between colleges, regional authorities, and leading employers. They co-design curricula, they modernize equipment together and ensure rapid graduate placement. As for 2024, there are more than 370 clusters nationwide covering 24 sectors. Initially, clusters were created in high-tech and mid-tech industries, but now they also encompass significant service sector, including teaching and creative businesses. A particularly important feature is that employer participation is now mandatory. And a truly distinctive feature of this model is the financial commitment now required for employers. So for every 2 rubles invested by the state, by the Minister of Education, participating companies contribute at least 1 ruble to the cluster. So this is a kind of a change. And as this federal project continues right now, in 2025, the 2 last years, 2024 and 2025, represent the culmination of the rapid transformation. And the major highlight here is intensive scaling of the project of Professionalitet and its approach to modern apprenticeship, dual learning as a package solution that can improve vocational education nationwide and also might be adopted, for instance, in higher education programs. Another highlight at this moment, this is about new legal acts on setting enrollment quotas. They're now aimed at cementing public-private partnerships. Enrollment quotas are set through coordinated workforce planning between education authorities and employers. So these measures position vocational education at the heart of national modernization and technological renewal. If we get back just on the next slide and visualize all that we just discussed, the trends of centralization and employer engagement throughout the key areas of Russian vocational education, a distinctive pattern could emerge. In the pre-Soviet period, there was a high employer engagement, while state centralization was minimal, resulting in a decentralized and flexible system. Entering the Soviet era, centralization and employer engagement, they reached their peak. The state took direct control, establishing a tightly planned system where industry and education were powerfully integrated, and that was a central tool for economic planning and social mobility. In the post-Soviet transition, both centralization and employer engagement sharply declined. The system fragmented, the role of employers weakened, as the economy underwent radical transformation. And during the period from the mid 2000s to around 2013, 2014, both dimensions began to recover with renewed efforts to coordinate from the center and to invite employers back into the fold. And today, the current era, centralization is somewhat higher than in the post-Soviet era due to ambitious federal projects, but for sure below the Soviet peak. Employer engagement, while improved compared to the immediate post-Soviet years, remains only moderate, stronger than the previous low, but yet not fully institutionalized as a system-wide partnership. So I guess we can now switch to the micro level and talk about pathways and labor market outcomes, right? Let's start by looking at how post-school education choices have evolved in recent years. Over the past decade, there have been three major shifts. On one hand, the vocational college track has become stronger, with more and more students enrolling in colleges right after completing the 8th grade. And here we're seeing not just a growing interest of the vocational route, but also a significant reduction of the number of dropouts after grade 9. At the same time, the conventional academic trajectory from grade 11 straight to university has become less dominant. This is the purple line. By 2024, just 66% of school leavers follow this route. Importantly, this decline at university entry after grade 11 is not the result of more students going to TVET after 11th grade. Now, as you can see, the proportion entering TVET after 11th grade has remained stable. Rather, this reflects diminishing access to post-school higher education overall. More graduates of 11th grade are now being pushed outside the higher education due to barriers in access. So that's not about their preference for TVET. What happened to the graduates of TVET? On the next slide, we can see that. First of all, when we examine the labor market outcomes of TVET, we can see such a fascinating, I guess, picture. On the left chart, you can see the data. This is the survey data of Rostat. That shows a pretty high employment rate of TVET graduates after 3 years from graduation, above 80%. Especially impressive compared to many countries struggling with high youth unemployment. But of course, this employment trend tends to climb further as graduates gain some experience. But on the right, you can see the breakdown of these headline numbers, and it's even more revealing. According to the administrative data, we have a unique trace-study administrative data that covers almost 9% of all graduates of VET in higher education in Russia. According to this data, only 58% of graduates are officially formally employed in the formal sector, with about 5% recorded as self-employed. Beyond that, there is a gray area. The rest of the graduate cohort cannot be fully tracked in available administrative data, highlighting the complexity of employment pathways, for instance, work in law enforcement, service in military service is not tracked here. But also we can suggest that at least 7% of TVET graduates could be working informally. This is the data from another sources, because administrative data cannot help with this. Right. The next slide about wages. Looking at wages provides another important dimension to understanding the outcomes. In Russia, there is kind of good news. There is a clear earnings premium for both higher and secondary vocational education in Russia, but it depends. Graduates with mid-level TVET qualifications earn on average 31% more than those who completed upper secondary education. In contrast, those with lower skill vocational training earn 9 percentage points less than mid-level qualified peers. What stands out? There is the gender gap here. A challenge not unique to TVET for sure, but still worth mentioning. Among TVET graduates, the gender pay difference can range from 20 to 30%. And this gap can be explained, first of all, by the choice of the field of study. As you might remember, less paying specialties, helping professions are predominantly women in technical engineering jobs, predominantly male. So this is about the choice of the field of study rather than discrimination in the labor market. Yes, and the final lens through which we can assess TVET graded outcomes on the next slide is by looking the employment by sector and the issue of skills mismatches. Interestingly, that while the majority, 45% of the Russian TVET students train in technical and engineering fields, but the majority of them end up working in retail and trade, a sector where many are overqualified for sure. And this results in a high incidence of field of study mismatch that you can see on the right among TVET graduates compared to university graduates, right? However, there is a nuance. Overqualification, where individuals hold higher qualification than the job requires, is relatively rare among TVET graduates compared to higher education graduates. However, this might hinder the situation when mid-level grads, they work at lower skilled jobs, but without this breakdown, this looks quite positive for TVET graduates. In contrast, you can see that it's far more common for university graduates to fill roles designed for those with vocational qualifications. So underscoring an issue of skill and qualification mismatch on the Russian labor market, which according to surveys can reach 30% overall. And in conclusion, I guess my final slide would be the next one. I'd like to bring to the table some deep challenges that shape the reform agenda in Russia's TVET. First of all, we are witnessing a big change. This is a shift from a state-governed, school-based TVET system to a system that is genuinely responsive, collaborative, and industry-oriented system. And the major challenge from my point of view here is that employer incentives remain quite short-term, despite all the efforts done by the Ministry of Education. True change depends on broader economic and institutional reforms, not just educational policy. And transformation of TVET system to a more collaborative and industry-oriented system requires a new mode of employer engagement, moving beyond talk and advisory roles to true partnerships when employers invest in hiring and shaping programs. And this turn addresses big context of business climate, of trust, of regulatory policies, all these issues that go beyond educational policy, and they cannot be combated in one shot. Moreover, TVET system, as we showed, is deeply rooted in historical legacies. So it would take time, this reform, and effort to make this shift. And also, I would like to highlight the two other challenges that could limit the pace of development. Firstly, I've put it like provider divide. This quantitative growth in TVET has driven qualitative changes as well. The student body has become more diverse, attracting more youth from high-income families in big cities. But some institutions have become selective, attracting high-achieving applicants, while others primarily serve at-risk students in remote areas. And the growing heterogeneity complicates efforts to standardize the quality across the system. And states' projects funding on infrastructure, facilities, teachers' development also contribute to this growing gap between top-performing providers and under-resourced, underqualified colleges. Lastly, there is a clash. In my view, there is a clash between youth ambitious for flexible, high qualified, upward careers and state priorities for early career tracking, labor market matching, placement, in these low-skilled professions. And I guess that these challenges could hinder these reforms. So my concluding thought is that Russia is definitely, its TVET sector is heading a new era of its development. In the past decade, has truly become the TVET moment in Russia educational policy, and that's remarkable. But this momentum is driven by a combination of factors like shifting demographics, evolving labor market needs, changing educational aspirations. However, as the TVET system undergoes this rapid transformation, there is a real risk that progress could become fragmented and deepening existing imbalances, and even creating new forms of stratification within the educational system and within the vocational track itself. Uh, I guess I would like to stop here because I guess I'm run out of my time. Uh, Thank you very much. I very look forward to the discussion. Yes, and before I pass the mic to Stephanie, just a small announcement about at the next seminar in the series, I will discuss Chinese TVET, steering reform in a higher growth system. We warmly invite you to register and participate and continue the discussion. But now I'm really happy to join the discussion, to hear your comments and how this experience of Russian TVET resonates with your national context. Thank you.